Hello, I'm ljoseph. I'm the founder and CEO of iFirst Medical Technologies, and we're very excited to be here today to tell you about our diagnostic platform. It really is incredible in the way that it's universal in its applications. But what really gets us excited is blood coagulation. And the reason blood coagulation gets us so excited is that how big of an impact it has on the world. Coagulation is the root cause that kills the majority of people in the world today. And if you're probably familiar with the terms of blood being too thick or too thin. And if your blood is too thick and you're over 50, you're at serious risk for heart attack and stroke. And the leading cause of death for people over 50 is heart attack and stroke, which is all clot related or primarily clot related. And as you're younger, anybody that's below 50, the primary cause of death is trauma. And severe injury can cause trauma, and if you're bleeding and your blood is too thin, you can easily bleed to death. So those kind of things, all those things combined, really create the leading cause of death in the world. And so one of the ways that you can restore this capability of somebody's blood clotting, and coagulation is like your body's ability to form a clot, is by giving them blood transfusions. And so like in a trauma incident or in surgical procedures, you need blood to restore that capability. And so in the United States, every 2 seconds, somebody needs blood. And this contributes to saving 4.5 million people every year. And what's very important to this is to be able to get the information you need and give those people the blood products that they need. But what's just as important is knowing when not to give a blood transfusion, because blood transfusions are a very serious procedure. And you don't want to give somebody an infection. It's possible to give somebody an inadvertent infection of HIV or hepatitis. So doctors are very worried and concerned about that. In addition, you can also have an immune response to the blood because it's actually from another person. And those can be very, very serious. So one of the primary reasons you would need a blood transfusion is trauma, car accident, things such as that. In the United States, it's a huge problem. There's over 3 million trauma incidences in the United States every year, and about 150,000 deaths due to trauma. Around the world, the problem is even bigger with 5 million deaths. And the good news of this is that about 1 million of those lives can be saved with better control of bleeding. And one of the ways to control that bleeding the best is restore that ability to coagulate correctly with a blood transfusion, and with a blood transfusion using the correct blood products. So the way that is done in some of the bigger hospitals that have large amounts of trauma patients come through their doors, they have expensive equipment that resides in a laboratory. So the trauma patient comes in, somebody will take the blood, they'll run it over to the laboratory, they run it back to the doctor, and the doctor pulls out a laminated card out of his pocket, and he looks at the hospital protocol that tells him what to prescribe in terms of the blood products. So this whole procedure can be very time consuming. But even in this case, iFirst can provide that information at the point of care in the hospital. And then that information can be readily integrated with their hospital protocol, so it just tells them what blood products they need. So if you take this outside the hospital, we can save even more time. We get these devices in ambulances, and we can treat these people at the point of care, at the point of injury with the point of care device. We can transmit these results to the hospital, and then before the patient gets there, the blood products are thawed, the blood products are ready for the patient, and the patient's ability to clot is restored. And so if you look at this problem, it's actually much bigger than just trauma. And one of the most important things is to look for these underlying problems with coagulation as early as possible. There's 49 million surgical procedures performed in hospitals in the United States. Just recently, that is surpassed by outpatient surgeries. So there's 52 million outpatient surgical procedures. And in any of these, anytime somebody is anesthesiologist puts somebody to sleep and puts them under the knife, so to speak, it's a dangerous ordeal. And if there's underlying coagulation problems, there can be serious consequences. Things like smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, taking aspirin, foods that you eat, herbal supplements, all these things can cause coagulation abnormalities that can be a serious problem in any type of surgical procedure. So they do not have a global coagulation analyzer at this point that can capture all of those types of problems. And you can't test for all those things that I mentioned. So it's very critical to have a global assay to capture all those things. So if you think the problem is big here, it's even bigger in space. Because in space, we don't have the resources that we have here. We're very limited. So an analyzer like ours that does coagulation, that does a whole other slew of things that are needed, would be very, very useful to have. And part of the problem with space travel moving forward, especially as we're going to Mars, and just as they were describing just a few moments ago, inhabiting these planets, radiation is a huge problem. And you're just constantly, or you're potentially bombarded by radiation in space. And so this space can be extremely detrimental to your ability to clot. And this is a viscoelastic test, one of those laboratory instruments. This is a study that was sponsored by NASA, and it shows the inability of the blood to clot. And on the left is clot firmness, and you can see over days of exposure to radiation, it seriously affects that strength. And I'll show you in a minute what these parameters are in our test. And then the other one is how long it takes the blood to clot. And that seriously degrades too, overexposure to radiation. So what's the problem with the tests that are out there? Well, PT and INR are commonly used. That's the conventional coagulation test, but they really are only the tip of the iceberg. And the reason they're only the tip of the iceberg is that they're only giving you information on the amount of time it takes for the clot to form, and it doesn't even include platelets. So your blood has a lot of components. It has platelets, it has fibrin, and these things are very important for your body's ability to clot correctly. So when you don't have a fundamental component of the blood in the test, it doesn't give you the full picture. So in our test, you can see here the blood is not clotting at this point, about the 3-minute mark. You can see it start to clot, and that clot progresses. This is where the platelets and the fibrin are attaching and forming the clot. The clot is strong at this point, and the clot firmness is good. You can see that it slightly degrades, and in a normal condition, it will degrade slightly. If it degrades excessively, that's clot lysis, and it's a major problem. So this is one of the only ways that you can test clot lysis. So why do we outperform our competitors? Well, on one end of the spectrum, you have very bulky, very expensive machines that take technicians that have to reside in the laboratory, and then it takes a lot of time to get that information. And then on the other side, you have point-of-care tests that give you the PT and INR. So they really don't give you the information that you need. So with iFirst, our analyzer provides that information that you need at the point of care, and it gives you that laboratory grade information. And so the way we do it is we kind of tap into the power of the iPhone. And I think everybody realizes over the last few years that the devices we carry around in our pockets are very, very powerful computers. They are as powerful as a desktop computer just a few years ago. The cameras are amazing sensors. And in addition to that, you have all kinds of things like GPS that we can use when we're transmitting information from an ambulance, accelerometers, that if I turn it upside down and I'm left-handed, I can put the cartridge in with my left hand. If I flip it up the other way, I can put the cartridge in with my right hand. So there's so many built-in features of using such a powerful device. And the other half of that is our BioMIMS cartridges. And the BioMIMS cartridges, such as this one down here for blood coagulation, and you can see the blood in the well there. And then our interpretation of these cartridges using computer vision. And it's a technique that we use for tracking the coagulation, but it's also applicable for other things. We've also demonstrated you can do it for blood typing, and there are a vast amount of other optical assays out there that we can adapt by using these techniques. So it truly is a universal platform. So when you're in space and you've only got one analyzer, you want it to test the most important things and as many of those important things as possible. So once again, because it is connected, it's easy for us to pull our data up into the cloud. We're also including information using the Apple Research Kit that gives you information on the patient. So what's our business model? Well, our business model is pretty straightforward. It's an old-fashioned razor blade business model. We make all of our money on our cartridges. Our cartridges are inexpensive to manufacture. we can charge a premium for them because the laboratory grade machines cost about $300, or actually over $300 per test. And in addition to that, we'll expand our market in the future with a suite of other tests. So our team is the team to make this happen. I am the founder and CEO of the company. I invented this technology. I've got about 17 years of industry experience, and I've got a master's degree in electrical engineering. Kevin has navigated this path before with FDA clearance and clinical trials. And in addition to that, he's just a brilliant physician, in my opinion. Nick is an awesome developer. He's the one that has done these computer vision algorithms that create or integrate all these things together to give our results. And Daniel is not only a great mechanical engineer, but he's got a great eye for design. You can see in the designs of our enclosures. And so in addition to a great team, we have all-star advisors. Dr. Holcomb is a leading trauma surgeon. He was an Army colonel retired. He's served as a trauma surgeon in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Iraq. And he's a pioneer in using these viscoelastic tests and creating these transfusion algorithms. Dr. Schneider has also been very insightful for us in helping us understand some of the other applications. In addition to that, he's also an entrepreneur, so he's a good guy to have on the team for that reason. Chuck Stead is kind of our big picture advisor. He's a former CEO of Hawaii Pacific Health, and he's just an expert in value-based healthcare and just the big picture aspect of the healthcare industry. And Steve Markowitz is just a very instrumental person in our company. He's a great mentor. He's got a lot of technology experience, a lot of experience in investing, success as an entrepreneur. So if we look at the total global need for this market, it's altogether, if you look, we've got about 1 billion trauma patients, and this 1 billion trauma patients around the world. And for the preoperative screening, we have about 350 million, so this is in millions. So we have about 1 billion trauma patients throughout the world. We have about 350 million surgical procedures performed in the world every year. And then we have about 2 billion people that are at risk for heart attack and stroke. So all combined, if we look at this, the total available market is large. So we have about an $8 billion total available market. So our first goal is to get about 10% of this total available market of $8 billion. And we're going to start off in hospitals, we're going to start off in emergency rooms and in ambulances, and then we're going to eventually move throughout the hospital. There's a lot of need in other areas of the hospital. For instance, there's postpartum hemorrhage problems when in childbirth. So we foresee our devices kind of spreading throughout the hospital and becoming the new standard of care. And as that kind of trend continues, they'll go out into the outpatient centers, and eventually will also be used for screening for people at heart attack and stroke in your physician's office. So for our first product, we're on schedule for doing all of our FDA testing and launching our first product at the end of the year. We are very fortunate to have some great connections. As soon as we get back, we're going to be testing at the Blood Bank of Hawaii. We're going to be doing studies on our repeatability and reliability of our tests. We're going to be doing some tests on intra-device testing. And we're also going to be looking at normal patients, so we'll be able to see the range of what we call the normal numbers that we would see on our device. And then after that, we're going to be returning to Houston, Texas, at the Texas Medical Center and the Center for Translational Injury Research. And then we'll get those outliers of the trauma patients. So we'll be able to demonstrate the capability to repeatedly and reliably test normal patients, and then have the ability to show the clinical thresholds with our parameters for transfusion with the trauma patients. And we are really here today to continue that trend of building connections and networking. And we've already talked to a lot of people. We've talked to investors, and although we're not fundraising at this time, it'd be great to build those relationships for the future and continue that trend of just networking. And we've also talk to people here at Canon. So we're looking for manufacturing partners. And it would be great to partner with a company like Canon. And Canon does have a medical branch, and so they can help us make our cartridges better. In addition to that, it'd be great to be doing some clinical trials at Duke. There's a lot of opportunities for us, here today to really make this happen. And, and the last thing we need is a channel partner. And with a channel partner, we'll really be able to plug into the world globally and get this device out there where it's needed. And so iFirst really sees a perfect storm coming in the future of healthcare. Healthcare is going to dramatically change as we know it. And the reason is that when diagnostics are taken in the future, it's going to be different for each individual. Okay, I'll wrap it up. So by combining all the information of your personal health records, your digital health records, genetic profile, you'll be able to get healthcare that's personalized just for you. And we're going to be at the epicenter for that. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome Kevin Lai, Dr. Kevin Lai, our Chief Medical Officer up here, and we'll be open for questions. Thank you.
Luke, thanks for the presentation. I appreciate that. So I have just a quick questions. You answered my last one about FDA pathway in one of your last slides. So my two questions are, a lot of these testing in terms of figuring out the technology can be done in the lab, right? So you can figure out whether it's doing the right thing, and you don't necessarily have to do it on a patient before you know if the product is working. Having said that, collecting samples in the field when you're in the ambulance and people have trauma, it can then present additional challenges. So my first question is part of your testing going to include, you mentioned emergency departments, but also EMS type of trials where people are going to have to use it in the field? That's question number one. And then two, you mentioned some communication between the device and the hospital, and I'm assuming that has to go through some sort of electronic health record communication, or if not, what are your plans for that? And if it is electronic health records, have you figured out how that's going to integrate with hospital records?
To answer your first question, it's fortunate that we've already got a lot of attention through this NASA competition because we were featured in our local news. And then shortly after we were featured in the local news, the local regulatory body that governs all of the ambulances approached us with an email and said, hey, can we work together? And the answer was, of course, yes. And I think although it might not be in our immediate FDA pathway, we'll certainly get our devices out there and use them in that operational environment to get a feeling for what those problems might be as early as possible. But it's not in our immediate path because the FDA approval is going to be more difficult with that. So it's much better to start in the emergency room and then move forward from there. And then your second question was communication. Yeah. So with the communication, it's something that's evolving. I think that there are other companies that are doing similar things in terms of relaying information forward, and we have kind of reached out with them to try and see if we can't team up with some of this information. But a lot of it too is kind of hospital dependent, and I think that's part of what I was kind of saying. In the future, these things are going to be more fluid. Right now, digital health records, some hospitals do it one way, another hospital does it another way. We're talking with the blood bank in San Diego, the San Diego Blood Bank, and they've got an awesome system that we're hoping to plug into. But most places don't have a system like that that gives you the information that you need. So, for instance, they're so integrated that they know what blood products each hospital has. So one of the things that we can also do is in cases of like a massive train accident or something where there's mass casualties, we can have this triage ability to be able to send the patients to the correct hospitals, so that one hospital doesn't run out of blood products. And if somebody needs a specific blood product, they'll get routed to the proper hospital. So it really is a dynamic thing that depends on the state of readiness of that hospital and system.
Good morning.
Morning.
Luke. And good morning. So great presentation and really impressed. I'm from Silicon Valley. There's a rule of thumbs in Silicon Valley that basically if a startup is capable to deliver more than $10 million revenues 12 months after GA is considered a unicorn, meaning the valuation will be more than $1 billion. Do you think this is your case?
That's what we're shooting for. I mean, it's all about execution. I honestly believe the market is there. There's a desperate need for a product like ours. So it really comes down to execution. So we're not going to project anything less than the best.
You don't need any funding for that execution?
Not for the short term. I mean, for what we're doing over the next few months, that's why I didn't want to focus on that now. We'd love to build relationships and talk about that moving forward, because that's a slow process anyway. No one's going to write me a check here today. It takes months and months for those things to kind of happen. So what we wanted to talk about today is primarily just building that network and building those connections. And especially, when it comes to things like channel partners and putting all those moving pieces together with manufacturing partners. Because that's really, the ideal thing is to have, some venture capital and some, strategic partnerships and having that kind of confirmation of both.
And what's your plan, if you may share, where the $14 million will come from?
Well, in terms of revenue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come from the cartridge sales primarily. And, if we're correct and we can get $200 per cartridge, that money adds up quickly, especially when you look at our margin. They cost us $5 now, and we're in very low production volume. So as that production volume increases, that the margin is just going to be even bigger.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
To piggyback on Michael's question, but do you currently have someone that has knowledge of integration with Epic or Cerner or some of the other big EMRs? Have you done this before?
We don't, but for the short term, it's really not a problem until you include the patient's name. So and that was one of the things that was really enlightening to us, because until you add that, we can grab all this data to our cloud from millions of patients, and until you have that patient's name, it's really not a big deal. So, and I think we can kind of cross that path when it comes to integrating, as it comes, but not everybody uses Epic, and that's another problem. So I have talked to other companies that specialize in that. So we're at the point now where we're trying to figure out if we're going to do that internally or we're going to hire an outside third party, to do that. But in the short term, it's not going to be a problem.
Second question is, what's your strategy around cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's the same thing. A lot of the cybersecurity thing can be handled by a third party, because the only part of this information that is critical is that patient's name. So there's just kind of like that key to unlock this information with that patient's name. So transmitting the information ahead with some kind of code or some kind of an encrypted capability that is just unlocked by whatever specific system they have, whether it be Epic or something else. But I don't think it's going to be a major problem.
A great presentation again, as the previous commenters made. But I want to say that I'm curious about, do you know, are there competitors that have products out there in the market or that you're aware of that are going to beat you out there?
Not in this space. I mean, the predicate devices have made things that are maybe the size of a Mr. Coffee and they weigh 20 pounds.
Okay, so nothing handheld.
But that's nothing handheld that does the viscoelastic testing
that
I'm aware of.
Do you have any technological challenges that you still have to address, and how are you going to go about that?
Yeah, I think there's some small tweaking that we're going to have to do, in terms of getting the complete range, and that's why we're going to be at the Blood Bank of Hawaii. That's why we're going to test the blood of trauma patients, because we have to have a large range of capability in terms of sensitivity, testing the thin blood to the thick blood, so to speak. But our device is fully capable of that range. It's just going to be a matter of tuning it and tweaking the software.
From the NASA perspective, have you looked into the effect of space on human blood and how you may have to tweak this instrumentation for that particular type of purpose? I know you addressed the space as being a cause associated with radiation. What about microgravity, other sort of things?
No, absolutely. And I think There's definitely, I did some research on it once we were recognized by NASA. I did a lot of publication research and found out that, wow, this is probably why they're interested in this. This is a major concern. But just like with flying, the microgravity kind of environments and being in a certain position, there's definitely other possibilities that can cause clotting problems for astronauts. So that's definitely a problem. But we do believe, and I'm not sure if this is part of the question or not, but we do believe our device will work in space too.
I just wonder if there's a way to develop a partnership between our astronaut office and that kind of thing, should this get to that point.
Well, and I'm from Houston, I'm from JSC, so I think we can work on that. I mean, we can definitely introduce you
that'd
to
be
the
awesome.
right folks. And I'm not a microgravity expert, but I think what Ramona was referring to also, you get microfluidics and how the blood will transport on your device.
I believe, we've talked about it, and I think there might be some modifications we'd have to make, for space applications, but fundamentally there's not a problem with it. But let me know when we get to do the hyperbolic plane ride kind of thing. I'm game. I'm ready. I'm ready for that.
All right.
It sounds fun.
Is all your data analysis done on the iPhone or the device?
At this point in time, it is. But I think, it's one of those futuristic things to me that's just incredible, is like as the bandwidth of the phone, continues to increase, that, it's like we have unlimited supercomputing power when the time comes when we need it. And so it really comes down to like, how awesome the camera is, which I think Canon can maybe help us with in the future, and then what the bandwidth is. So then, that's where the first thing when I saw them zoom from like 6 miles away and read the side of an airplane, I'm like, okay, can we do that on our device? Can we digitally zoom down to that level? So.
And what's the flexibility of your chip design? Can you do tests other than electro-optical?
We can in the future, but I think I have to attribute a lot of my success to listening to people and not listening to people. And one of my colleagues told me once, because I originally had envisioned like an electro-MEMS device, with like a comb actuator to do this. And my colleague said, in our space, everything's optical. In life science, we look through microscopes, everything we do, there's agglutination, there's catalase reactions, and all these things are optical. And, even, tagging things with, green fluorescent protein and all these labels, almost everything is optical. So you can do things electrically, but that's just not the way it's done in laboratories. So there's, we see a huge market for taking traditional tests that are done in a lab, interpreted by a person, and then, replacing that with our combination of computer vision, AI, and microfluidics and MEMS, bio-MEMS.
One quick question about your pricing mechanism. You're talking about selling it for $200 a cartridge in the US, and as we all know, we pay more for healthcare here than anywhere else. How do those numbers translate when you start to go outside the US and look at the 2 billion or 3 billion people that you're looking at as potential patients?
Yeah, primarily what we've done is research what's out there now and what people are paying. And I don't believe that companies like Abbott and the other companies that are competing in the viscoelastic space, change their pricing, dramatically. And I know, primarily what, Abbott gets for the iStat cartridges. They're anywhere between, $200 to $400. And then the viscoelastic tests, I know, are $300 in the United States. So I haven't done exact comparisons for, the prices in Europe, but I don't think they're going to be dramatically different.
Thanks very much.
Very welcome.
Thank you.